Talk about the things we're trying to do with ResumeCFS and how ResumeCFS as a charity fits into the sort of ME spectrum, and what work we're trying to do, which perhaps all complements and augments what other charities are trying to do and what we can do in our small way to fulfill various things which perhaps are being missed by some of the larger charities. There are two things we're trying to. First, I'm going to talk about the National Disease Register and why we need it and how people can participate in it. And then we'd hope that Dr. Martin Lee, who's another trustee of ResumeCFS, could be here today to talk about his ideas for educating GPs in ME. He prepared a set of guidelines and an assessment form, both of which go onto one side of A4, which would be an excellent help for GPs, because GPs don't have time to read 500 pages of nice guidelines, for example, but they do want some help in making the diagnosis and looking after people who've got ME. But unfortunately, Martin is extremely ill and can't be here, and he sends his apologies. He's here with us in spirit, but I'm going to act as his mouthpiece when we talk about the GP project. Starting from, what do we know about ME? Well, the answer is precious little. There's a lot of research going on in the world. Something, and you know, this country certainly pulls its weight in terms, or punches above its weight in terms of research. Something like 50% of all the papers on ME which have been published come from the United States. 30% of all the papers in the world come from the UK, which is pretty good, really, until you perhaps look at the content of some of them. And the rest of the world put together produces the other 20%. So we're certainly punching above our weight in terms of research, but somehow it doesn't amount to a coherent corpus of knowledge about ME, and that's what we're trying to address. So what do we know? Well, as you all know, it's a syndrome, which means it's a condition defined by its symptoms and not by the underlying pathology. And why is that? Well, quite simply, we don't know what the underlying pathology is, and that's one thing we want to find out. Characterised by multi-system dysfunction, varies in severity and duration. This is stuff you'll all know, because those of you who've experienced ME, either yourself or someone you're looking after who's got ME. It can have an acute or an insidious onset, and there's a range of trigger factors, many of which are viruses which spark it off. It's more common in women than in men, and it tends to start most frequently in young adults, but it can occur at any age, and it can occur in both sexes, all sections of the community. So there's nobody who's actually immune from the chance of getting ME. So what don't we know? Well, we don't know the underlying pathology. Is it one disease or several diseases we're talking about? We just don't know, and we're trying to find out. And the other thing we don't know is how to treat it. We haven't got any magic bullets. There's plenty which doctors and other health professionals could do in terms of general supportive care and symptom control, but mostly they don't know how to do, or many of them don't know how to do it, and a lot of doctors just don't feel confident about treating ME, even when they are sympathetic to people who've got ME and believe in the existence of the disease. A lot of myths about ME, of course. Some people say it doesn't exist, and a lot of doctors say that. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, or they say if it does exist, it's a psychological condition, and I know that causes great offence to a great many people who've got ME for understandable reasons. There's a feeling abroad that NICE has had the last word on the subject, but when the NICE guidelines came out from the National ME Observatory, which I'll talk about in a minute and my role in that and how that fits in with what we're doing, we put in some evidence suggesting that the NICE guidelines were actually premature, because the NICE process works well when there's a decent evidence base to interrogate. That's how NICE works. It looks at the world literature, sees what the consensus is among scientists, and comes up with recommendations. We felt the problem with ME was there simply wasn't an adequate evidence base to interrogate, which is why NICE came up with this capricious conclusion that what was needed was lots of graded exercise and cognitive behaviour therapy, because that's actually the only areas where any reasonable amount of work has been done. And that doesn't really help. And there's belief that graded exercise and cognitive behaviour therapy are effective treatments, and we've all seen the results of the PACE trial, which I was extremely dubious about. And I've put my reservations in writing in the Action for ME magazine, which you might or might not have seen. So the disease register, that's where we're starting, because this is where this is a project which ResumeCFS is taking a very active role in. This is part of the National ME Observatory project. This was a project which was funded for 3 years by the Big Lottery Fund. It was sponsored by Action for ME because as academics we couldn't apply directly to the Big Lottery Fund ourselves. We had to have a charity to sponsor the project. And it's an academic collaboration of 3 universities: the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the University of Hull and the University of East Anglia. And my role in this was the overall project coordinator of the whole project. It was a sort of germ of an idea it had about 12 years ago, which has taken a long time to come to fruition. But it seemed to me when I had this idea that, as I've already said, that one of the problems with ME research is that we know we've done a lot of research, but it doesn't amount to a coherent corpus of knowledge, and there's lots of things we don't know. And why was this? I think my next slide probably says some of the reasons. The problem is it's very much, what research gets done is very much dependent on the vicissitudes of funding for a start. I mean, you get a little bit of funding and you go away and do a research project, write a couple of papers and publish them, and it's all very nice, but it doesn't necessarily add an awful lot to the sum total of human knowledge. And the other problem is that we don't really have any sort of framework or infrastructure to support research. And we need an infrastructure to support research, and we also need an umbrella to accommodate research, and that's what we didn't have. And I say it's coming from the sort of cancer world, where the research infrastructure is really highly developed, and there's a lot of support for work going on in cancer, and it's pretty clear that over the years we have developed a pretty good corpus of knowledge about cancer, and that's reflected in the results of treatment. It's actually helping people to get better in a way which they weren't able to 20 or 30 years ago. So that's what we needed in ME. So, there we go. So that we had really 2 purposes in developing the observatory. One is to fill in gaps in our knowledge, and we concentrated on epidemiology and qualitative social research, both of which are very important. Epidemiology, because we don't really know even how many people in this country have got ME. And if you go to government and you say, well, lots of people have got ME in this country, and we'd like some funding to support research and to invest in treatment and that sort of thing. And then they say to you, well, how many people have got it? And you say, well, don't know really. And it doesn't make you look very credible. So, we've all had this figure of sort of 250,000 people in this country have ME. It's been bandied around. If you look for the empirical research basis for that, there isn't one. It's just a figure which has been plucked out of the air. And there was a survey done in Chicago a few years ago by some people called Jason and his colleagues at DePaul University, where they found that 0.42% of the people they looked at had ME. Now, if you take that proportion of 0.42% and apply it to the UK population of 60 million, the figure you get is 252,000. And that's almost 250,000 we thought of, isn't it? But you can't do this. This isn't the way to do science. You can't decide what the answer is and then go around and cherry pick the world literature until you find the piece of research that supports what you originally thought of. That's not how science advances. We need proper empirical work done in our own population if we're going to really find out how many people in this country have ME. And then we can sound a lot more credible when we talk to government. The other area we were concentrating on, which is also a great big gap in knowledge because not much research had been done, is qualitative social research. Now, I'm not a social researcher, so it's a bit of a sort of closed book to me. This was all done at the University of East Anglia. But again, it's really important because everybody knows how nasty it is to have ME and the sort of privations and discrimination that people suffer when they've got ME, and which members of their family suffer also when someone has ME. But it's all very well to know it anecdotally, but people like government and research funding bodies and so on will only listen if it's been done in a properly scientific way and written up in peer-reviewed scientific journals. So we've done this in order to add credibility to the claims we want to make about more resources being needed for ME, better treatment and more research. So in the observatory, we've already produced 5 scientific papers. They're all published, if you go to the website, by Biomed Central in various Biomed Central journals. They're all open access and they're freely available. Anyone can download them from the internet. And there's more papers on the way. But the 2 ongoing projects from the observatory, one is the disease register and the other is the services directory. We thought these were both really important, and I'll explain why the disease register was important first of all. A lot of the research which has been done has been intervention studies of trying different interventions, CBT, whatever, on people attending a particular clinic. Now, to do that, that presupposes that the people who've been involved in the study can actually get to the clinic. Now, if you're severely affected and you're housebound or bedbound, then clearly you can't. So there's no way that the people who participated in the intervention studies to date can be representative of the ME population as a whole. Yet people take the results of these studies and apply them to the whole ME population, which is a really unscientific and illogical and unacceptable thing to do. So what we wanted to do is to get a list of people with a group of people with medically confirmed diagnoses who are not drawn from the tenders of a particular clinic, but who could be who could form a sampling frame for other studies where we could, intervention studies, which could be based then on groups of people who are representative of the ME population as a whole, or particular subgroups of interest within it. So that way we can begin to produce findings from intervention studies which could be applicable to the whole ME population, and we could, with scientific justification, generalise the findings to the whole ME population. And that way we can begin to get a corpus of knowledge about what works, what really works in ME and what doesn't, and get away from this sort of fixation with graded exercise and so on, which seems to obsess an awful lot of people. The other thing we've done is the services directory, which was done using a sort of snowballing technique to find out what was available where. And this really has two purposes. So if you're in a particular area where you might think there's nothing much available in the way of services, you can go to the services directory, which is currently hosted on the Action for ME website, University of East Anglia having finished the work of developing it, and you can see across a whole range of services, from clinical services to advocacy and a whole lot of other services as well, what is actually available in your area. But I think we can also use this as a research tool, because we can use this to identify which areas have under provision of different sorts. And again, we can use this as a stick to beat over the head of the people who make policy and allocate resources in this area, so we get away from the postcode lottery that currently exists in ME. And there's two new projects coming along which are really going to be based on extensions of the disease register, and that's a biobank and a post-mortem tissue archive. And I'll come to that a bit more about that in the future. So how do we set up the disease register? Well, we recruited participants in an unbiased way from a large population. And as I say, we can use these people recruited as a sampling frame for other studies. People who are part of the disease register aren't committed to taking part in other studies, but they have all agreed that they're happy to be invited to take part from time to time, and obviously whether they actually do will be based on their informed consent, even when the matter arises. But we've also got a group of people who are well-characterised people with ME from all shades of severity, who we can follow through for over a period of years to find out what the prognosis and outcomes of ME are. Because despite all of the experience we've got and all the work that's been done, there's something about which we know very little, what the long-term outcomes of ME are in a large group of people with ME. So we're going to do both of those things. So how do we do it? Well, we worked with 29 sympathetic GP practices in 3 regions, and these are the regions around our universities which were participating in the project. So it was East Yorkshire, East Anglia, and quite a large slice of London as well. And between them, they covered a population in excess of 140,000. Then we didn't rely on GPs' diagnoses, because, as you know, even sympathetic GPs, and these were all sympathetic GPs, are not very good at diagnosing ME. For the most part. So we developed a computerized algorithm so we could search their databases in order to find people with clinical indications they might have ME, and then get the GPs to let us know if any of these people had other reasons to account for their symptoms, which would be exclusions from ME. And we looked at we used 2 case definitions. We used FACUDA, which isn't entirely satisfactory in many ways. I'm sure you've all heard of the FACUDA definition, developed by the Centres for Disease Control in 1994. We use that because even though it's not really designed as an epidemiological tool, most of the previous work in epidemiology has been done using FACUDA. So if we want to compare our findings with other people's work, we had to use it. But we also use the Canadian definition as well, because that's much more sort of state-of-the-art right now. And it appears that the people conforming to the Canadian definition formed a sort of subset of FACUDA. They all conformed to FACUDA as well, and about half of those who conformed to FACUDA also met the Canadian definition. So it looks like the Canadian definition is identifying a more severe subset of people within the overall spectrum of people with ME. And the database was designed and set up and is currently at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, so it may be that we're going to be moving that fairly soon, and I'll come back to that. So we found 510 potential patients who conformed to the algorithm picked up, And then we put them through a sieve to see which of these potential patients actually conform to the case definitions. Found 265, and then 216 were invited to join the registers. In some cases, the GPs felt that someone shouldn't be invited for all sorts of personal, or clinical, or other reasons. So we invited 260, and 160 agreed. So we're not aiming at comprehensive population coverage like a cancer registry. What we're trying to do is find a group of well-characterised people who we can use who we can involve in the two sets of purposes we've outlined before. So here we are. Most conform to the Fukuda definition. Half of those conform to the Canadian definition. And then we looked at these people, and we were running a parallel epidemiological study as well within the observatory. So we looked to see how these people conform to the general run of people with ME we picked up in the epidemiological study. And we find they're very, very similar. So we have got a representative group of people here. And there's a reference to it, and you can find it, as I say, Biomed Central. It's a paper we published on this. Now, can I come to Chrome now? Because this is where Resume comes in, and the relationship between Resume and the disease register really is centres around the Chrome database. Have you all heard of Chrome? I see a lot of nods and the odd shake, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. Chrome is another of these acronyms you get in the ME world, a bit like Resume. Only Chrome stands for Case History Research on ME. It was a project set up by a group of patients, essentially, with ME, about, must have been about 15 years ago now, who felt that not enough was being done to research what was happening to people who had severe ME. So over the years, they recruited about 300 people with severe ME, and that they were housebound or bedbound at the time of recruitment. And they've done regular follow-up over a period of years to find out what happens to these people in the end. And the project was designed to last for 10 years, and when the 10 years were up, they felt they got this database, which was immensely powerful and really valuable, and it'd be quite nice to be able to continue the follow-up a bit longer, because most of these people were still ill up to a point, having had ME, and we still didn't really know what was going to happen in the end in terms of their disease, and it would be very useful to know that. So at this point, I was asked by people running Chrome if we could consider taking over the database and running it within Resume. So it seemed to us that the best thing to do was, yes, we could certainly do that, but it would be very nice if the Chrome data could be also incorporated in the disease register, so we could then use the disease register's arrangements for following up patients to follow up this group of people as well. So we did that. What we did was we contacted everybody in Chrome and asked their consent to transfer their records to Resume. We've had about 150 positive responses now. We've got about just over 100 following our first mailing. We sent a reminder. We had about another 50 responses come in since that. And I think that's probably about as much as we're going to get, because a couple of years ago, another research project called Prime, which again you might have heard of, asked if they could incorporate the qualitative data from Chrome, the various, the comments and the free text which people had recorded as part of their database, and they got about 170 responses. So I think a lot of people were lost to follow up by Chrome over the years, and we just don't know where they've gone. So if it was 170 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, we've now found 150. I think that's about what we can expect to get. So we're in the process of cleaning up the records, because Chrome got a little bit behind with maintaining their database and generally tidying things up. And these patients will now be added to the disease register database, but still under the overall aegis of Resume. Really where we've got to with Chrome. So we're in the process of sorting out the respondents to the second mailing now, the reminder, and then they'll be incorporated in the disease register database as well. And Resume has taken on the challenge of maintaining this and trying to find the resources to keep the show on the road and to maintain the follow-up of the Chrome patients as part of the disease register. And indeed that gives Resume a very considerable interest in seeing the disease register itself is maintained and is active and achieves the things we want to achieve. At the moment, we recruited through the original study about 160 people to the disease register. We now have the additional 150 people from Chrome. We'd like to expand it to a much bigger scale of operation. This depends very much on funding and on and on getting us the sort of resources we need in order to do this. It's important we keep the disease register going and we expand it, because we have the other projects, and now I'm going to talk about the Biobank, which is going to be linked to the disease register. Now, biobanks are very much flavour of the month at the moment. You might have come across ME+Biobank, some of you might even be participants in ME+Biobank. I see one person nodding his head. Yeah. This is an enormous project, with a huge amount of funding. I think they've recruited something like, I don't know, is it 500,000 people now, or maybe it might be even more than that. You don't know. No. It's a vast project, but it's not disease specific. It's trying to look at lots and lots and lots of parameters of disease. And what it involves is people contributing blood samples at the outset when they're recruited to Biobank, as well as going through some fairly rigorous examinations to look at a lot of physiological factors concerning them. And then these people will be followed up for a long, long time to see what their eventual outcomes are. And if at some stage people within Biobank develop certain adverse outcomes, like particular diseases, the organisers can then go back and look at their original blood samples and see if there's anything in their blood which might have predisposed to them developing that disease later on. And it's beginning to identify both risk factors for disease and underlying disease mechanisms as well. Well, we thought we could use this for this approach for ME too. Though I didn't think the ME+Biobank in itself was a vehicle for this, because ME is still it's not exactly a rare disease, but it's not a particularly common one either. And also Biobank had its own agenda and lots of other priorities, and ME we thought would get squeezed out, as it so often does when it's mixed up with a lot of other things as well. So we thought it would be a good idea to set up a Biobank specifically for ME. Involving people who've got ME, and also we'll be recruiting healthy controls as well. There are a series of biobanks already at University College London, the Royal Free Hospital, which is part of University College London these days. We've managed to persuade Action for ME and the ME Association and ME+Research UK all to get themselves involved in supporting this and funding it. It's just started in August of this year, not recruiting patients to it yet, but we thought by linking Biobank, the people in Biobank, to the disease register, then we'll have the capacity to collect longitudinal clinical histories of people's progress over the years via the disease register, and that saves duplication. It also means if we want to study outcomes in the disease register, a proportion of people who've also agreed to be in the Biobank will have blood samples already collected and stored, and this will mean we can do a lot of work looking at the biochemistry and biomedical aspects of their disease by examining their blood as and when adverse outcomes of interest develop. So Biobank is up and running, and that's why it's really important to keep the disease register going and to expand the disease register. But again, as I say, as soon as we have the funding to do it, that's what we will do. So it's closely linked to the disease register, and the two together make a very powerful research tool. So each blood sample, as I've already said, will have a longitudinal clinical history through linkage to the register, and Biobank participants will constitute a well-characterised cohort of patients with biological, clinical and laboratory data attached to each one, which makes for a pretty powerful research tool which we can use and which we haven't had in ME until now. So this is a major breakthrough in terms of our research capability, which we hope will lead to major breakthroughs in terms of our research knowledge in due course. So who can take part? Initially, as I said, we'll be collecting patients, we'll be inviting patients currently enrolled in the disease register, including the Chrome participants, to contribute blood samples. But by Christmas, the people organising the Biobank will be able to register anyone with medically confirmed ME, and then we'll be going through the same sort of process we did with people who we originally recruited to the disease register to look at conformity to case definitions and that sort of thing, and also asking to examine people when they are recruited to the Biobank to submit themselves to various medical examinations so we can measure their blood pressure and their heart rate and all that sort of thing. So we have some basic physiological data about them as well. It'll be late 2012 before Biobank will be able to accept blood from other donors other than the disease register participants, including the Chrome participants. And the project currently funded is just for 15 months. So we hope by that time we've actually established political fact that the Biobank will be there and be in existence. And that'll help, it'll be a very great help in persuading mainline funders like possibly the National Institute for Health Research, which is the research bit of the NHS, or the Medical Research Council, or a big charitable foundation like the Wellcome Foundation, perhaps to pick up this baton and run with this and carry on with the funding for this project. That's what we're hoping anyway. So here it is. So what I said, this will be a key resource for medical research, especially for studies of phenotypes, that's the various clinical manifestations of ME, and also looking for biomarkers in the blood samples which are collected for diagnosis and prognosis. How will it work? When people come along with a research idea, then there'll be a formal approval process which will require people to get ethical approval for their studies and to identify how they're going to get informed consent and this sort of thing from participants to do this. But before samples and clinical data will be issued, and there'll be an expert panel which will manage the overall approval process. So that's the disease register and biobank. Now, ResumeCFS has got an important role in supporting the disease register. We've got the Action for ME and ME Association and ME+Research UK supporting the biobank. And the thing which is likely to get lost in this is the disease register, and that's why it's really important and why we look to people to help us, to find the resources to help to keep the disease register on the road. That's what we want to do. So, and that's how biobank links into it. I also mentioned very briefly, we're hoping to set up a post-mortem tissue archive. That's going to be a lot longer job because for reasons which I'm sure we all find completely incomprehensible, people are not willing to devote samples of their brain until they're dead for scientific research. And obviously, why people should want to impede the growth of scientific knowledge and so on, I really can't understand. So we have to wait till people die, and we hope that people with ME are going to live to ripe old age and not die too quickly. So we'd like to have lots and lots of post-mortem specimens of neurological tissue, but we're realistic, and we know it's going to be a long time before it builds up to a critical mass, which will be really useful in terms of research. But it's on the stocks. There's a plan that we have, and if it takes 30 or 40 years to come to fruition, which it probably will, it's still a useful thing to do. I personally would quite like to be doing this on a European level, and I think we could if we can get funding, but getting European funding is an absolute nightmare, and so our chances of achieving this, I think, are not great. But we've got it on in our sites, and it's something we're going to try and develop as the years go by. And it will be really useful if we can get it. I'm working with a neuropathologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital at Cambridge who's very interested in doing this. So I've come now to the GP project, which is Dr. Martin Lee's project, as I've already mentioned. Now, Dr. Martin Lee was a GP himself in Swindon, who ran these. He's recently retired because he's not been well at all, and he ran the Swindon ME clinic, and he was very concerned that a lot of his colleagues really were all at sea when it came to diagnosing or treating people with ME. And he felt there's a real problem having been a GP because you get assailed with so much publicity material and so much reading matter from the PCT and other people that you just haven't got time to absorb all of this, and most of it ends up in the wastepaper basket. And that's not what we wanted. We want them to understand and know a little bit more about how to handle ME. So what Martin has done is come up with, he designed an assessment form which GPs could use to assess their patients with ME, and also a set of guidelines. This form was, he asked me and one or two other people to look at the form as well, and we felt it would be a good idea if we could sort of shoehorn it entirely onto one side of A4, because this is the sort of thing which will capture GPs' attention, which they might, there's just a chance they might look at it and read it. And the guidelines similarly go onto one side of A4, so a GP can sort of laminate it if he wants to, put it in his bottom drawer, and if he's faced with a patient with ME, he can pull it out and it's there immediately available for him to read, and it will give him all the basic facts he needs to know to make a diagnosis and to set about getting the patient what we can give in the way of supportive care. I know it's not much, but it's better than nothing at all. So here we are. This is what Martin has done, is a checklist to aid GP diagnosis and then guidelines to assist GPs. Each on one side of A4, designed to be readily accessible to help GPs. And this will link to the disease register because when we're recruiting more people to the disease register, when people here who express an interest and want to be part of it, when we're able to sort of follow up that indication of interest, we will need to contact GPs because we will need their help to confirm diagnosis via access to their computerised records. So if we have informed GPs who are able to make the diagnosis, that makes that life a lot easier for us and improves the efficiency with which we can handle this recruitment process. And that can only be to the good because we can then develop a much more substantial disease register in due course for all the research purposes which I pointed out. So this is the other project which we have in mind in ResumeCFS, which we're trying to get underway. And it's another thing which we will be doing as and when the resources enable us to do it. So that's really all I wanted to say. But I'd be very interested to hear any questions or any points you want to raise in terms of discussion, and I'll try my best to answer them. But thank you very much for being so attentive.
Right, thank you very much, Derek. That's very interesting. Just so that you understand where we're coming from at ResumeCFS, if we see, I see anyway, because I'm a member, as I said before, of your group, the ME groups around the country, and 100 and something of them, I think, Jen will correct me, we see those as a fantastically valuable resource in developing the sort of work we're doing. That's why we're here tonight, to ask you if you will help by joining one or both of our schemes here. If you're interested in doing that, and we really do hope you will be, if you're willing to become, you suffer from ME and you're willing to become one of the people on our disease register, then there are forms at the back, or you can download them from our website if that's easy for you. The details of that are on the slip you probably picked up. So there are application forms for our disease register available before you leave. On the other hand, if you're interested in converting your GP from he doesn't understand, he doesn't believe it exists, to one of the people who really do know about ME, then there's also at the back there the evaluation form for your GP. You could take one of those tonight, you could fill it in, you could go with that, and you can download the guide notes as well if you want to off the website, and you could say to him, look, this is what we're trying to do, this is my circumstance, would this help you and me to understand ME better? It will not mean that tomorrow morning all the GPs in this country will suddenly become aware of ME. It will be a drip feed situation, but they only work when you start dripping, and this is what we're hoping you tonight will do. You'll join us in trying to make this work. So those forms are available at the back. There's the application for the disease register, and there's the evaluation for your GPs. If thirdly you feel you really are interested in helping us, we do need finance to do a lot of the things we're trying to do. If you're prepared to make a donation, there are also forms at the back for gift aiding. You probably all know that if you are paying UK tax, and if you gift aid the money, effectively the charity gets 28% more than you give, because we can get it back from the Exchequer. So if you would like one of those, and there are some envelopes there if you don't feel you want to give the money tonight, but at another time you might do, please take one of our gift aiding letters and one of our pre-addressed envelopes with us.